All right. Cool. Well, thanks for everybody for coming to this office hours talk. Thanks to Discord team for inviting me on here. Um, and we'll kind of get underway with this talk about follow the money, one ops to invoices, and SFDC. I think somebody just joined and they got their mic making a lot of noise.
I got it.
So what I want to talk to you guys about is just really like the whole post one op life cycle of data for a business, and why this is really important for you to understand how to do, why this is really valuable to you as a team member, understanding, how businesses want to take, that closed one op and get all the way to that paid invoice and really juice sales and juice profitability of the company. So we're going to run through a lot of like really kind of higher level kind of architectural designs, and kind of different issues. And then we'll talk a little bit about different solutions you can use and tools you can use. But mostly we're going to talk about conceptually, how do you go from that one opportunity all the way to that closed one invoice, both with one time as well as recurring revenue streams. So we're going to look through those things. Kind of a little bit about me. I'm the CEO of Growth Heroes. We're a small consultancy. I've actually been using Salesforce since 2003, if you can believe it. So I've been using it for a long time. We're an ISV partner and a consulting partner. So just all around, been doing a lot of Salesforce work for a lot of time. So recent successes, again, this is just kind of some of the things that we've done and we look at. We're always looking at how do we actually help our clients increase profits, scale their business faster. And so that's why we think about the invoice a lot, because I really feel like if you don't connect your sales all the way to finance, that you're missing out on a lot of opportunity to help either your internal company or your clients really increase profitability and scale their business. So we think a lot about that with every client. Really kind of think through this whole process of, Salesforce as your hub for the entire enterprise and the platform you can connect everything to. So not just marketing, not just sales. Service is really hot right now with field service and all the other field work and service work they've got, Service Cloud Voice and all these cool things that are coming out. But that final piece there, getting into finance, is key, and you can connect into a lot of different systems. SAP, your NetSuite, any of those systems, QuickBooks Online, those things like that. You can connect all of them together into Salesforce. And we feel like if, a company is smaller, that they don't really need any other systems, right? You could do everything in Salesforce, including your accounting if you want, or you could offload that to some simple solution. But any company that's $100 million in revenue or less, really can do a lot in Salesforce and doesn't really need a whole lot of other ERP systems. So we'll kind of get into that. And so kind of what's the whole point of this talk, right? Kind of pitching in the title, why do we care about this? Why do we want to help companies, grow their profitability and not just do the sales and marketing side, is because they've got a responsibility, right? Corporations, especially here in the United States, your first responsibility is profitability. It's making money. So anything we're doing, right, from as a Salesforce administrator or consultant, is to help the company scale and grow profits. And even if you're in a nonprofit, you still want to scale that nonprofit and efficiently use that money to make the most impact in your community that you're serving. So either way, this is really at the end of the day, what a business cares about is how do we actually get that invoice paid. So I'm a big Covey fan. I like a lot of different books and strategies. And, one of his things is begin with the end in mind, right? And I believe strongly in this for how do we look at going all the way to an invoice, right? And what do we want to do to get there? And that we should think about that before we build a lot of things out post opportunity, because it's also going to impact what's on the opportunity. It's going to impact what's in your product catalog. It's going to impact how you manage commissions and forecasting and revenue. All of it matters if you want to try to get all the way to that closed paid invoice, in Salesforce, or at least having the status there. So we think about that end in mind, where really are we going here, right? The big thing is we're going to an invoice, right? And so, this is QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online, I think, again, is a great tool for any company, 100 million revenue or less, even over. You could get away with using the enterprise version of QuickBooks Online, unless you're getting into some weird kind of edge cases and some job costing and things that it doesn't quite do well at. But otherwise, it's a great ledger. But like most accounting systems, you have super limited control over what an invoice looks like, right? So at the end of the day, what your customer is going to get from you for you to get your money back from them is going to be pretty standard, right? You've got sender info at the top. That's your company. That's the address you're sending from or the address you're providing the service from. That could be very important from a sales tax standpoint and a nexus standpoint. The bill to, where you're sending it to. Again, even if it's a virtual good, that billing information can be very important for sales tax and nexus and all these different rules and regulations that even service businesses are having to follow these days. Your terms over on the right, your invoice terms, when you think the invoice was being generated, how soon they have to pay, when it's due, that type of information. In QuickBooks Online, you get 3 custom fields. That's it. Not like Salesforce, where you get like 500 custom fields. You get 3 custom fields. That's it. Anything else, you got to check these boxes on or off to add and remove information from the invoice. So again, very limited. You got your line items, right? You can put things on there like your category, your description. You can override the description one-off for each line item if you want. But you can't really do a whole lot else there, right? You got it. You have your quantity, you got your rate, you got your amount. You can have, line level tax. Otherwise, you can have summary level sales tax and discounts and totals and things like that. And then you've got the little message down on the left that nobody really ever looks at. Most corporations are automating this stuff and they're just ingesting it into a system like Bill.com anyways, or they're forcing you to type it into their system. So there's not a whole lot you can change here. And again, so the point here being that invoices and accounting are so strict compared to what we're used to in Salesforce, where we can do whatever we want. Most accounting systems are very rigid around what they expect, what they need for their invoices. So thinking about that end in mind, like what accounting system does your company use? What do your invoices look like? How do your customers pay you? Do they pay by e-check? Do they pay by credit card? Do they expect an email with a link to the invoice? Do they require the invoice to be a PDF attachment on the email because they have an automated system that peels the PDF out, automatically reads it, and automatically puts it into their system, right? There's a lot of things around just like, how are you actually getting paid? Now, if you're a credit card company and your upfront transactions, right, it's a little different. The invoice matters a little less because they're just getting it to print a copy. They've already paid you by credit card. But still, you can't really change it a whole lot from whatever QuickBooks or NetSuite or Stripe or whoever is giving you that invoice template. It's really hard to change that data model. So think about that first and foremost as you're building some of this stuff out. And so what's the point, right? So we want to help the company scale and grow profitability. What do we actually want to know, right? If you're a one-time, non-recurring business model, you want to look at things like what's the gross revenue, right? What's the total amount of the opportunity? What's the total amount of the invoice? What's the cost of goods sold, right? How much did this invoice cost? So you actually have your margin and your net revenue. Things like commission splits, right? You're going to want to look at those things. If there's commission and there's teams and splits. And you also want to look at sales tax, right? We're looking at that on both sides. Recurring SaaS metrics. Again, things like monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, net MRR, net ARR, right? If we actually track margin in Salesforce, right, then you could actually see even on your recurring revenue, how much does it cost to maintain and build that software product versus how much are you selling it for? Those things also really help with not letting sales reps discount too far towards margin, right? And so I think it's really valuable to look at margin on invoices in Salesforce, whether you're one time or you're recurring. Other interesting things that you want on the recurring side, I see a lot of people want year one value. So if you've got like a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract, the first year has setup fees and coaching and all these things that kind of fall off after year one. Some people want to look at the year one value versus the annualized contract value. The annualized contract value is just the whole thing averaged out over the whole lifetime of the contract, whether it's recurring or one time on that recurring revenue opportunity. And then revenue recognition, if anybody's familiar with like ASC 605, 606, we can talk more about that stuff later, kind of as you guys have questions after I go through all this. But those are kind of some of the big things that we always see people really concerned with on recurring revenue or SaaS metrics, side of things. So how do we get there? How do we, if we want to answer these questions and other business metrics, right? How do we get there? And again, we're kind of working a little backwards here. And so other things that we want to know, right, that especially as a SaaS company or any type of recurring revenue company wants to know is they want to see what their rev rec is going to look like. They want to see what their forecast is going to be like on a recurring revenue basis month over month. So they want to know, hey, by December of this year, what's going to be our MRR? right? We don't necessarily care as much about our one-time setup fees. They're nice to have. They've had the books, but they're going to get investments and they are going to be valued based on their recurring revenue at the end of the year, right? So we can actually show that and forecast out, how do you do these things over time? So these are just some examples from an app called Sales to Cash that we actually developed, talk a little bit about. There's a lot of other options out there for you, but we've got some of this experience by building this app. So if we kind of start overall, like what's an entire business look like from start to finish? This is an example of a service business, right? We're going from the top, from leads and accounts and contacts to opportunities, and maybe we're using quotes. That's pretty standard, right? Then we might go into orders and purchase orders for any physical goods, parts, equipment, things like that. We might go into the bottom left on the service side for work orders and preventative maintenance and testing and all these different things you're going to do with physical equipment. But at the end of the day, if we're doing physical orders, if we're doing field work, if we're doing service, if we're doing professional services or recurring revenue, at the end of the day, right, it all goes to invoices. And so we got to get it to an invoice somehow. Is your invoice in Salesforce? Is your invoice in your accounting system? Is it in both? I like it being in both because that way you can control the generation of the invoice. In Salesforce, we've got a lot more freedom and flexibility, and then just push the invoice into your accounting system. And then we want to get into receivables, right? How do you actually track from an accounting standpoint? Hey, we're owed $10,000. Where is that payment sitting? Okay, somebody paid us $5,000, and okay, now they paid us another $5,000. So here's our 2 payments that we've received against that invoice, right? A lot of times people aren't going to pay the entire invoice. They might short you sales tax and not pay it because they're tax exempt and they didn't tell you, right? There's multiple reasons why you're going to have more than one payment against an invoice that you've given a customer. You also might have multiple invoices on one payment, right? So you might have 2 invoices out there to the same customer totaling $20,000. They might give you one payment of $20,000 that you have to split back across those 2 invoices. So thinking through all that, how that all flows is really important. And then going into your accounting system, in this space, this example is QuickBooks Online. We're going to your other systems like your customer portals for online payments and sending the invoice to them and dealing with all that information. So again, like I think it's very powerful for all of you to think through all the way from lead, to paid invoice that went to a customer, came back, went into the accounting system. What's everything in between, and how do you connect those dots from the beginning to the end? Because that's where you get a lot of ROI. You get a lot of metrics. You get a lot of ability to shape the growth of the company and work with executives on, hey, here's your margin. Here's this in real time. Here's our commission. Here's where people are, discounting too much. It's really hard to get that financial metrics in Salesforce if you don't have the invoice and the margin and the commission in Salesforce. So I'm going to go through a couple different ERD models and different flows for data, and then I'm going to show you a couple other examples, and then we'll just go through discussion. So I'll probably be done with all this in the next kind of 15 minutes or so. But a basic RevOps flow, right? So in the beginning from that lead, right, we're going to have our account, what matters on the account, the billing info and the shipping info. We have our contacts, what matters on them. Again, their billing info, depending on your data model. You might be selling to different contacts at different physical locations that are all part of the same account. So you need to know which billing info, billing location you're using for your invoices. On your opportunity, we really care about start and end dates if it's not a one-time deal. Again, that billing info, commission splits, if we have teams and commissions and splits, that's all very important to have on the opportunity. From your products, your product to catalog, as well as your opportunity line items. We need the price, obviously, but we also would love to have cost or margin. Sometimes you can just do a margin as a percent for SaaS businesses, or you can do an actual fixed cost for physical goods and other services where you know what your fixed cost is. You also can put your tax codes on your products, makes it really easy to do your sales tax later, and your schedules if we're looking at recurring revenue. And we found that you can pretty much do any recurring revenue with either a one-time monthly or annual schedule. Now, if you get into, online services like something like AWS where they're charging by the millisecond, or the hour or the day, right? You might have to have other schedules in there. But for most B2B, B2C companies, you're not quite getting into that level of detail, but you could add those schedules on your product to catalog. So, hey, we're charging you $10 a user a month, right? Or we're charging you $5,000 a year, for support or whatever the case may be. for your products. So once you've got your opportunities and your products right, you're either going to go into orders, and order items, which should be more for your physical goods and things of that nature, versus going into a contract items for professional services, software as a service, field service, any of that type of stuff where you're actually doing work over a period of time, or even if it's just one-off work, but you're doing work and you want to track that and maybe turn that into a project, with a tool like TaskRay or something, you can do all those cool things off your contracts. Orders are nice too, because you can bypass all the opportunities with your e-commerce stuff and that can come in. But again, either one of those scenarios, no matter what you're selling, at the end of the day, it's got to go to an invoice. And again, it still has to go to an invoice, even if you are doing prepaid with credit card. That customer still needs to print an invoice, put in their accounting system to prove why they spent that money. So we want to get there. And then again, on the invoice items, right, the big things: quantity, unit price, again, unit cost. I love having cost on there, and your sales tax rates, right? And your sales tax rates are really easy if your product has your tax code and you use a tool that keeps track of all the tax rates and all the locations that you're working in. And then your receivables, again, it's really detailed. It's like your payment amount, the payment date, the payment method. Did they use Stripe? Did they use Authorize.net? Did they pay by e-check, ACH, wire? Right? You could track all those things, and ideally, you're putting all that into some sort of payment portal, either through like Salesforce Community or some other online portal, or you could do it through your accounting system and send it out that way. And so we'll go some pros and cons of like where do you do that later. That's kind of overall like a basic RevOps flow and kind of options, in the middle of are you doing physical goods and orders, or are you doing services and contracts? So different models here. One time, this is super easy, right? And a lot of out-of-the-box solutions will do this for you. So you can have just your ops and your op items goes to invoice and invoice item, one-to-one, right? $10,000 opportunity is one $10,000 invoice, and that's it. Super easy. With NetSuite, you can use Celigo. The cheap connector has that perfectly mapped out for you. There's also other easy connectors for QuickBooks and other things that have that very easily mapped out for you. So this is a perfect place to start if you do have true one-to-one opportunity to invoice. Otherwise, you kind of go into a contract model, right? Which kind of we're focusing a little more on this talk around the revenue ops and kind of contract for recurring revenue, where you can still go one-to-one. Your opportunity creates a contract. Your opportunity items create contract items, and then that contract then generates an invoice and invoice items, right? So you've got that contract in the middle. This is nice for anything where every time you sign an op, you sign a new paper contract on its own, and you do what that contract says, nothing more, nothing less, right? You deliver that thing you've agreed to deliver. But if you kind of get more into like a recurring revenue or like an evergreen, contract model, right? You kind of start looking at, does it make sense to have one contract per op and one invoice per contract or not? I'm a firm believer of, as long as you have more of an overarching master services agreement, professional services agreement, something like that, that you should have a lot of opportunities and a lot of opportunity items, one contract with a lot of contract items and a lot of invoices and invoice items. And anytime you win a new opportunity, you just update and extend that existing contract and add new contract items to it. The reason why I like this model is because it really makes it easy to see the lifetime value. It makes it really easy to see like when did they first become a customer, and you just keep updating and extending that current contract. This is something I'd love to kind of debate and discuss at the end. If people have other models that they like or reasons why they don't like this model, I think that's cool too. It doesn't always work, but I try to go this way whenever I can, just because it makes the metrics and makes it a lot easier to grow the business. So again, many ops, we've got new, upsell, renewal, right? We've got one contract. We want to care about the start date and end date. Anytime we do a renewal, we're going to kick the end date out. Anytime we do an upsell, we're not, right? We're just going to add on to it. And we might have things like invoice schedules that are different from your contract and your contract line item length. So you're going to schedule your invoices monthly or yearly or upfront. Anytime an opportunity is closed one, they just got to pay that whole opportunity on one whole invoice, right? You can change your invoice schedule to be different from everything else, which complicates things, but is kind of mandatory in a lot of situations. Again, with many invoices, each invoice has to have their own start and end date. What chunk of the contract did that invoice cover? So I like this model a lot. This is what we do in our app. And so kind of going through a scenario of what's this kind of life cycle of this kind of evergreen contract, right? The top left bucket is really, your first opportunity. So you got that first opportunity item. This is where you're going to generate the contract, and you're going to copy your opportunity items into contract items. And then it's going to generate your invoices and invoice items off that contract, right? Whether it's one-to-one or it's one per year or one per month or however you want to do those invoices. And then from the contract, you'd go ahead and do your upsells, right? So what I like to do is go on your contract and have like a quick action or something that generates an opportunity for you. That's an upsell opportunity. And that's going to automatically copy back onto that opportunity any items that are currently active or, haven't already expired that you want to resell. And you grab those items, you can do something fancy with a flow screen or Lightning Web Component if you want, or you can just throw them all on there and then tell the sales rep to get rid of the ones they don't like. It depends on what you want to do. But then when you close win that upsell opportunity, right, it shouldn't extend the contract, but it's going to create new contract items, right? So it's not going to really update the contract record at all, but it's going to add contract items to it, which then through roll-ups, right, roll-up summaries and things are going to update the total amount of the contract and other values like that. So you can do those things as well. And then you're going to do a renewal, right? And that's where you're actually going to go to the contract, say, hey, I want to renew this, create a renewal opportunity, and go through that whole process. And then when that renewal opportunity does close win, that's when you would kick out the contract to be longer. So if your contract was 3 years, you got a 1 year renewal, right? When you close win that opportunity, it's going to add a year 4 to the same contract and just kick out that end date by a year. So that's the way I like to do it. And again, then you just keep spinning your invoices off that contract, and you're spinning your opportunity items off that contract. It also makes it really easy for entitlements and provisioning. If you do have a platform with user licenses on your contract items, you could use entitlements. You could say, hey, you're entitled to 10 users, or maybe your contract item is pay per user and you've got 10 users, and you could take that contract item and you could send it off to your own platform to say, hey, provision them 10 users. And you can sum up what are all of the active user lines and sum that up and send that total to your provisioning platform or LMA or, whatever you want to turn on and activate those licenses for that customer. So it even helps with that as well. Contract to invoices. So this has taken me forever to kind of figure out how to explain, and hopefully I'm explaining this pretty well here. But say you've got a new 36-month contract in this recurring revenue space, right? We've got a setup that's $5,000 setup fee, right? A one-time fee, or you could have coaching fees or other SLA fees. That's maybe, $5,000 for year 1, whatever the case may be. You're going to have some front-loaded, fees. Then you're going to have, a 36-month, $100 MRR per month. Say we've got 10 users times $10 a month. So we've got $100 a month in MRR across the 36 months. And then we do an upsell later after a year and 2 months, or a year and 4 months. Sorry, we're going to do an upsell kind of midway through year 2. So how do you invoice this, right? How do you actually deal with this issue? And, again, you can cheat, and there's some different tools we'll talk about, and there's ways you can kind of send it to your accounting system and be like, I don't care, but it's really good to understand how the systems work and how you need to think through it. So what we would normally do is say we set the schedule to invoice yearly. So that first year, right, we're going to take that whole $5,000 setup fee, plus we're going to take the first third of the 36-month line item there, right? And so we'll take that $1,200 plus that $5,000, gets you $6,200 on your first invoice. Then your second year starts. When your second year starts and that invoice is due, maybe it's due 30 days before year 2 starts, right? You can kind of front load it, say, hey, you got to pay for year 2 before year 2 starts. Well, that upsell doesn't exist yet, right? So you're going to only bill them for the $1,200 on that invoice. Then when the upsell gets generated, you got to come back and say, oh, now I need to create a gap invoice on that same schedule for anything that's been added on. So you'd create a shortened invoice for that difference on that upsell. And then once year 3 rolls around, right, you can cut it at year 3 and say, hey, I'm going to lump all this stuff together onto one invoice for year 3. And so then the big thing, right, is just to say, hey, does my total contract value equal my total invoice value, right? And that's going to depend on if you generate all your invoices up front and just kind of leave them open and let them update automatically over time, or you don't generate them up front, right? And then your invoices are always going to be less than your contract total value. But you can try some of those things out and kind of look at some of those things. I'm getting some people are trying to do some mentions at me, but I'll look at that later because you got questions at the end. So that's kind of that. And then so those are some of the different models and things we're kind of looking at. How to cheat, again, like if you don't want to mess with all this stuff, there's a lot of solutions out there to help you with it, a lot of guides you can go by. Full disclosure and disclaimer, we're a consultancy, but we also built this app called Sales to Cash. It's streamlined. It's really just for kind of smaller SaaS companies and recurring revenue companies. It's really kind of slick to do what it's meant to do, but it doesn't do a whole lot else, right? So it was built for a smaller solution, and it's a really nice tool for what it does. But there's a lot of other kind of larger tools if you need a lot of flexibility and a lot more enterprisey features and things that you need to do. But if you just need clean ASC 606, RevRec, and invoicing and contracts and all that stuff, we can do that. But Financial Force is awesome, heavy duty product. Salesforce has CPQ and CPQ billing, does a lot of really cool stuff around, billing and arrears, metered usage, revenue recognition, does all that stuff. Good option to look at. And Accounting Seed also does RevRec and does some interesting things that you can do on platform. So all these solutions are on platform, right? And then there's other solutions you can do off platform, like you could, Sage would handle it, NetSuite will handle it. Sometimes you need to add something to NetSuite like Billfinity. You can add on top of NetSuite and some other add-ons for NetSuite to do recurring revenue and RevRec, the way that you want to do that. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You don't have to roll your own system by any means. But again, I think it's really valuable to understand the different options and how you actually get to that invoice, right, and roll that backwards. So again, like what do we really want to know, right? Like if we're actually looking at like data that we want to see in Salesforce, and here's an example, from our app, but basically on the opportunity, right, you need your start date, you need how long it goes for, and you need an end date. You need your ARR, your MRR, your totals, your ACV, all those metrics we talked about are really good to take a look at. And then on your products, right, you want your price, your schedule, and your duration on those products, because again, you can mix and match one-time setup fees, right, along with recurring monthly, recurring annual, daily fees, metered usage fees, paid per text message, things like that. There's all sorts of different things that you can mix and match together that have their own start and end dates. So I really feel like you need line level start and end dates on everything, and line level schedules and line level sales tax, and just doing everything at the line really, really helps. So, and then, kind of what do we want to know overall from like a contract, right? If you did have a large contract, you'd want to see on your contract, your roll-ups for your total amounts, your different fee types, your revenue recognition, your deferred revenue, your total revenues, your total invoices with sales tax, how much of your invoice has been paid. There's a lot of different things that you can see and actually answer these questions for, the finance team inside of Salesforce. And you want to see all your invoices and opportunities and everything kind of on there. And the beauty of something like this too, no matter what system you pick, is that then you can do real-time accurate commission tracking to your sales reps. You can do commission based on margin, right? You can do just so much information can be available in Salesforce that it really just connects the dots end to end. So you want to be able to see this whole, picture of what's on the contract, what data is the contract generating, how do I create a new opportunity, what upsells are out there, did I win all my upsells and renewals, and getting that all in one place is very valuable. So some bonus round stuff, just kind of, I didn't know, kind of where I'll get to. We can get into sales tax more later. If you're going to do sales tax in Salesforce, just use Avatax. I mean, there's probably some other solutions out there. They are by far the leader. They have integrations with a lot of the states in the United States where they get live real-time updates for sales tax rates for every city, county, parish, state, federal, just all the different rates. And they have the international rates, VAT, other things as well. And so the beauty of them is you just, on your opportunity, you just send it to their server. They charge per send like 10 cents, 20 cents, depending on what it is. And it automatically puts all the tax on your opportunity and on your line items with the reasons for those tax rates. It has solutions for exemptions. It has solutions for remittance and Nexus. So it'll help you set up Nexus. It'll help you track Nexus. It will actually, if you want, take the money out of your bank account and send it to the states automatically. And if you do all that, then they also like guarantee you in any kind of liability audits with states. They'll help go through an audit for you. So there's a lot of stuff that finance just loves. If you're like, hey, we could use this Avalara, platform with Avitex and all the different solutions to, maintain compliance and automate compliance and remittance. It's a really, really powerful platform. So that's a great tool that we love using. And then I got some typos here. Then, accounting systems and customer portals, again, where do you do your payments in your accounting system? It's easy. No changes, are required. It's harder to automate though. It's harder to like do reminders automatically and like have list views of like which invoices, your team members need to call on. So it's really harder to kind of be flexible, right? But you don't have to do anything because they're already used to sending their invoices out through their accounting system. Tools like Bill.com really help with, automating remittance and things like that. So that's really helpful. Or you can use a customer portal. We really like customer portals, but it depends on your customer type. Are they going to log in? Do they have multiple invoices they want to pay? Do they have other stuff from you that they want to see, like orders, order statuses, shipping statuses, support requests, right? If your customers are engaged in all those things, then I think a community or other portal is really valuable for a way to not only send them their invoice, but let them log in and see them and pay them. And they can pay by e-check or credit card, ACH, wire. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with e-check and credit card to really, really reduce your fees. And then if you can reduce those fees, you can save a company a lot of money. Like you can reduce credit card fees by, 0.5%, or more, depending on what you're doing and what you're automating and what information you're sending back to the credit card companies. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do if you're using Salesforce for that. And no matter what you're doing, I would always recommend trying to sync the payment and balance back to Salesforce. So again, you can do things like only pay commission when the invoice is paid. Look at, did they short pay? Look at, how are they paying? Are they paying by credit card? Are they paying by, e-check? And how's that working? And even tracking your total number of days, to get paid. We had a client where on average, they were getting paid over 90 days after their invoices went out. They didn't really have a good way to see it and identify it. And once we put it in Salesforce and we tracked it all, they were to get down to 34 days. So they shortened their accounts receivable cycle by like 60 days, which is a lot of time. If you're a $50, $100 million company and you're getting a couple million in revenue 60 days faster, you can make money off of getting that money back sooner, right? So you can cash flow better. So there's just so many different things you can do if you do get the invoice information back into Salesforce. So I think that's pretty much it. So I'd love to just open up for discussion and kind of go through, what other things are you guys seeing? What do you think about, one versus many contracts? Do people have questions around, sales tax and payments or whatever else you guys want to talk about?
I have a question. So when you were talking about evergreen contracts with your contract items, do you typically, so you with an upsell, you can either add more seats at the same price, right? Or change your existing seats, or at least some of them, to a higher plan, for example. So are you like stopping a contract item and adding a new one, or do you end up with like multiples of the like dribs and drabs if they're adding seats in
Yeah.
this
So the way that I've kind of dealt with that is either you can kind of do it either way, but as soon as that contract item is partially invoiced, you run in a lot of trouble trying to change that contract item. So, what we tend to do is we tend to try to lock a contract item as soon as it's been invoiced. And then we say, if you want to correct it, right, you're going to have to like subtract it out, kind of credit it out, and then replace it with a new one. So you are going to have multiple contract items that are active at the same time that you kind of need a summary of if they're all the same user type, how many total seats do I have available? And you could have, like you got 100 seats at $10 a month, and then you add on another 50 seats at $12 a month or $8 a month, and you could do that, or you could say, no, I want to replace it, and I want to basically like renew early, and I want to convince them to go from the $10, bronze user to the $20 gold user, and I'm going to renew it early. And so what you'd have to do there is you'd have to do like a negative contract item to like credit that off, or credit it off on your invoice some other way, and then create a new contract item for like what the new stuff is going forward. So I probably would have that new upsell line start like today or whenever that op starts, and go forward to the end of the contract, and then also have a negative item to reduce off the old contract item if you really want to replace it versus just add to it.
I think that's how Stripe works, is why I'm kind of trying to mirror that. They kind of like cancel, refund, or cancel credit to the higher amount.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like with like say you're using sales tax, you're doing AvidTax, like you only have 24 hours to change that invoice. Once that invoice is out, like you're not allowed to change it anymore. And even from an accounting standpoint, once the month is over and the books are closed, so once August is over and the accounting team closes the books for August, you can't make any changes to August. So the only way you can make changes is with credit memos, right? And like negative numbers and reducing things back off. So yeah, we kind of try to follow that model too, and just have negative contract items to remove off some of those things.
Interesting.
There's not like a right answer, and it's pretty complicated. So it's good to think through again, like from the accounting standpoint, like even asking them like, hey, tomorrow a customer wants to upgrade, sales wants to like renew them early and replace this. How are you going to manually do that in NetSuite today or QuickBooks today? Because typically they're probably just have to deal with it and manually like correct it for you. And so if you can understand what they typically do and kind of work backwards from there, I think that's usually the best given like what your scenario is.
Have you used or interacted with Suite Billing yet?
I haven't looked at Suite Billing at all. We've worked with like Zora and some other ones, that are out there, but I haven't seen that one.
Sorry, it's NetSuite Suite Billing.
Oh, NetSuite Billing, yeah, we're more familiar with like Billfinity for recurring revenue as like an add-on. So typically once it gets into NetSuite, we don't really touch NetSuite. We just kind of like say, okay, how do you need this invoice to come over? How do you need this information? And then we make Salesforce kind of match that data model and prep it in Salesforce, and then just one-to-one it into NetSuite if we can. Anybody else kind of going down this process yet, or anybody else already have something in place, that you're using that's different from this? Do you have an experience with different products that people like? Anybody who's either already done it and maintaining it right now, or thinking about doing it the next year, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
I mean, if no one else is going to ask questions, I'll keep asking questions, but feel free to interrupt me anyway. So I think I'm struggling with the idea of renewal with Evergreen, right? So I guess I still have a term, even though if you do nothing, your tomb auto renews. So that's a renewal.
Depends on how you want to set it up. Evergreen might be a little confusing as a term for this, because it's not necessarily that it's going to auto renew. We typically always have like an end term. So like it's 3 years, it's 2 years, it's, however many years long, and there's an end date. And then it's a question of how do you renew? Some people want to generate the renewal opportunity on day one, so it's out there. So as soon as a contract's created, automatically generate the renewal op, which helps with forecasting. Right? If you want to use like standard Salesforce forecasting, you want to see what's out there in the future, you can create that opportunity right away. But then you have to keep it in sync. And anytime the contract changes, you need to update your renewal op and keep those things on there, which isn't that big of a deal, but you have to remember to do that or automate that. and then you can have that out there. And some people do say, yeah, well, unless they cancel, we also want the renewal opportunity to just auto close one, right? And you could give somebody a time period where you could automate with, Pardot, or even just, Flow or something, emails to say, hey, this is going to auto renew in 60 days unless you cancel. Here's a reminder. Here's your contract. Here's your renewal amount. And you could just automate all that and just say, hey, this is going to auto renew, and then just automatically close win the opportunity on the last day of the contract, and then just let it add itself to the contract and extend it out for another year. So I think it just depends.
I guess the renewal op as a whole is hard for me. Like, if obviously I get but it's not new ARR. Like, I'm not selling anything new. I guess it's continuing.
Yeah, so some people split out renewal versus upsell onto two different opportunities. So like an upsell at renewal, versus a renewal op. I don't like it. I think it's kind of, a little bit of a crutch, versus if you just put it all in one. What we do in our app is we actually track how much the renewal op is for based on what's on the contract. So what the ending contract value is. So if the ending contract value is 20,000, ARR, or 1,000 MRR, whatever the case may be, you can stamp on the renewal opportunity. Hey, this renewal opportunity started with renewing 1,000 MRR. And then what did you close win it at? You close win it at 1,500 MRR. And that opportunity has 1,000 MRR that's being renewed, and it's got 500 upsell on it, right? And then if you want to do commission and margin on just the upsell at renewal, you could do that as well.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense if you have that evergreen contract to start with, to even know what you started, where. Because like you said, if you're not maintaining, that's the struggle I've been having. If we do need the renewal opportunities, do you generate them immediately and maintain it? Or do you do it at 90 days, 60 days, whatever it is? Especially if there's no, there's no new paper, there's no new process necessarily. It's really just more of a financial kind of, they didn't cancel.
Yeah, there could still be a paper contract that like you generate from the op. So you can have a paper contract on the op, and like a paper quote, something that they do need to sign with DocuSign or something, to then extend the contract. But I think of this contract as like your service contract. It's what are you contractually, required to give them, not necessarily the one-to-one paper contract. So I would still see that this contract object could have 10 PDFs attached to it, one for each opportunity, that are the terms of that opportunity, that has the signature for that opportunity for those contract items, right? Like, this part of this contract came from this paper agreement. So I think of the paper contract as more just the opportunity as a PDF, right? That if for that opportunity to be closed won, somebody needs to sign something typically, unless you're auto renewing, and then they don't need to sign anything anymore because the original signature says it's allowed to auto renew. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. So.
How do I find out more about Sales to Cash?
We have a website, salesToCash.com, and anybody who's on here who wants a demo or wants to be able to play with it in like a sandbox org, just kind of reach out to me on Discord, just ping me, and we can kind of help you see how that works. And there's like a quick start guide. It only takes probably 30 minutes to install it and configure it. The bigger issue is like, how does your business run, and what are you going to do with all your historic data, right? And with any of these systems, right, how are you going to take all your historic data and get it into one of these systems is the harder part, versus just trying to set a system up. Now, CPQ billing, Financial Force, right, those are big, heavy implementations. So, but they also can do a lot of other things. So it would take a little more planning on those. But yeah, just ping me on here or just go to the website and check it out. I know a couple other people are on here. I noticed some usernames that are doing some accounting automation right now and some financial stuff. Anybody else have any comments on what they're doing, what works, what doesn't?
Hey, Jim. Henry here. I have to say, definitely use Avatax. Don't look at TaxJar or anything else just because their new package that integrates with Salesforce is super, super polished now. It just automatically integrates with the standard objects. So using opportunities, orders, that's done automatically. If you're doing something custom, like custom objects, maybe sales to cash or CBQ, they also integrate with that. And you just have to do a little point and click, and it's all done.
Seconding the Ava tax, it also fully integrates with the accounting seeds financial structure.
Yeah, because you're using accounting seed in Salesforce.
Yeah.
How do you like that?
Other than tech debt, it's all right. It's not too bad. It's a little clunky because I think Lightning, but it works.
Cool.
I was to say, I don't deal with contracts work typically. It's not like renewable contracts, one-time sales process. But we found the way around upsells and those particular things, mid-project upsells was a custom object that sits on the opportunity that tracks the upsell and then rolls up the total project value into a separate field.
Nice.
Hearing and learning about contract sales, though, renewable contract sales is interesting to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more kind of complicated, right, than just your one-to-one kind of basic model. And if you're in that one-to-one model, it's pretty easy, right? Any solution. And again, even if your NetSuite Celigo out of the box makes it super easy to integrate the two together. It's got predefined connectors that just takes an op and turns it into an invoice. And so really all you got to do there is get all those extra NetSuite fields on your op and pre-fill them and tell it when to sync. And that's pretty easy. It's kind of when you get into this recurring revenue stuff and all this rev rec and you're trying to divide everything up and smush everything together, it gets really nasty.
Oh, definitely. I'm enjoying in the learning process here about this, trying to find ways to get better forecasting with one-time sales. It's a lot easier, I think, in terms of being able to get good forecasting when you have renewable things to forecast with. It's been a bear to figure out better ways to forecast one-offs.
Yeah. Are your one-offs always different customers or do the same customers keep buying?
So our model is really strange. We do individual sales from our company, but then we also have representative companies doing sales on our behalf. So we do have consistent sales through those. That makes it a little bit easier to get a model to forecast with. But then the bulk of our sales is through our individual sales, and that's where the nightmare begins.
Yeah. And so we've had some customers where we've kind of looked at with tools like DLRS and the opportunities and doing roll-up metrics on total revenue by product family, and then revenue last 365, as well as doing snapshots of revenue last year, this year, and try to get a lifetime value and an average annual value per your repeat customer, even though it's one-time sales. And then you could do some health trending on if they're past 365 or even past 60-day spend is going down. You can kind of do some warnings on that, and then you can try to forecast on stuff like that a little bit. The other thing I've seen that helps a lot is trying to force the sales team to open ops as early as possible. I see a lot of companies where they only open an op once they already have a paper contract signed. And so you have no visibility into pipeline at all because every single opportunity exists for a day, or a couple days. So the more you can do to automatically convert a lead to an op before it goes to sales, with pre-sales, or the more you can do to have different different stages in approval processes in your opportunity. They can't send a quote unless it's ready to quote and it's been approved, or this or that. We tend to put a lot of like guardrails in the middle of the opportunity process to try to stretch the opportunity pipeline out like as far as possible for visibility.
See, that's something that I'm kind of fighting an uphill battle on with my sales director at the moment. So opportunities are created right away the moment we have an idea that this person might want a quote. So we end up with a boatload of just useless opportunities. But every opportunity has a quote, like that they did a quote, and that's what they're forecasting against. But it's like based on probability, and that probability field is controlled by the salesperson. There's no automation to it. It's how do you feel about this essentially, and that's the battle. That is not something that I can generate useful metrics on at all. Yeah, just kind of the wordless. Yeah. Henry had the same response when I told him about it.
It's tough, you can't always do it, right? And it's like what's good enough. That's why I was kind of saying what's the end in mind too, right? Like what are the metrics you could actually like measure, right? Because you don't want to put all this stuff in place and then be like, oh well, it doesn't actually answer my problem because we can't forecast anything and we can't figure out this metric. Then it's kind of like, well,
yeah.
What do you do? That's a tough model to forecast.
It is.
So.
And my sales director is utterly convinced that there is no way to automate a probability field. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, so we've done exercises in Excel for people to build their pipeline to make sure that their opportunity stages are key inflection points. So for SaaS companies, right, it's like, did they attend the demo? Typically that's a really good metric for a SaaS company to say if they did a demo, then it's this inflection point. How many demos close when, right? 25% of demos close when. So you can look at the historic data, and then you could say once you get to that stage, then you automatically set the probability to 25%, right? Or when I set the quote out, then what probability is that? So sometimes you can find a couple metrics by digging through your historic data and trying to trend on that. Otherwise, you just have to do like a trend line, right? You just have to look historic only, and then just do a trend analysis on that based on what's open, right, and what's going on, and just try to only look, in arrears. That's not ideal. So awesome.
Hey Jim, quick question about I'm thinking about Christie's question about evergreen and renewals. How would you handle evergreen customers that have a CPI increase year over year?
Yeah, and so we've dealt with that too, and so I can share this again here. Let me see if I can share this. But what I would do is when you're on your contract items, we track when they start and end, and then we say if they end on the same day the contract ends, then you should renew them, right? You should put them on your renewal op because they end on the last day. But then on your contract items, you could track in a field like like that price increase percentage on the contract item. And then when you're cloning the contract item to the opportunity, you could take that percent increase times that price. And you could do it that way. Otherwise, you could maybe also like do something with like your list and your sales price on the op as well. If you tracked it at the product level, like if you want to force everybody to it, but usually those things are negotiated, right? Like how much they're going to increase each year. But that's probably what I would do is I would put some extra fields on the contract item that says like what's the percent increase, and maybe you could set the field to a default value, like default 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever, and then you could override it, per contract, and that way you could force a default increase, but then allow it to be adjusted per contract terms. So that's my best idea.
Got it. I think we have some pretty complex CPI increases based on like different products and obviously customer types, and then like year one versus year two. May have to build out something like a custom object to kind of keep track of that.
Yeah, well, and if you're doing year-over-year price increases on the same op, then you could also just do 2 contract items or 2 op items, right? Like an op item for year 1 and a different op item for year 2, each one at its own price. So you can like tier the line items versus having one line item that tries to like ramp up, right? I think if you're doing ramp deals and you want to ramp up, a price over time, that each time it ramps up, it should be a different line item.
That's also true, but also you run into issues with like if the customer is changing up products or product additions or just downgrading, upgrading, and it makes that complicated too. So you would have to put negating line items for each of those.
You gotta let the sales reps do something. So, but yeah, I mean, once it gets that complicated, right, then it's kind of like, well, you get back into is it worth automating it, right? And so what we always, as you know, we always try to push people to standardize and do less of that weird stuff, as I call it. But sometimes with enterprise you just can't, and that's when you do overrides. You kind of let the sales rep do whatever they want, but that's going to get really just tougher and tougher to automate versus just letting the team decide with notes and things and reviewing your renewals before they go out, right? And you can put an approval process in place for certain renewal ops that the RevOps team has to, monitor all that and look at that. And I think that's why like there's the prevalence of RevOps, as a team now to actually say, hey, let's make sure the opportunity actually makes sense and actually follows the contract terms and actually does what finance needs it to and actually helps us profit and scale versus just whatever the sales rep kind of wants to do.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you figure the perfect solution for that, let me know.
Definitely, it's hard just because like so many different customers are going to have different CPI percentages, and like reps are going to have very custom deals based on like size and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of hard to automate. You just got to remember to do it when the rep does the renewal op or etc.
Yeah, it's not easy. But I mean, if you automate all the rest of the stuff, man, it gives them a lot more time to play with those numbers and kind of try to juice those deals and maybe do some more of that edge case stuff on their own because they'll have to worry about all this less. So, all right, well, that's 1:00. I'm not sure if there's anything else, but otherwise we can call it.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
And anybody else wants to reach back out to me, just kind of reach out on here and let me know.